You're listening to the Law Lives Project. I'm your host, Angie Vishianan. I'm a lawyer that launched a startup focused on changing the legal profession through mentorship. Through this podcast, we will explore the early career steps of real lawyers to help students see that many of us didn't have it all figured out at first. It takes time to find your way in the profession, so we want to shed light on some of the challenges people face in the earliest part of building their careers. Each week, I sit down with members of the legal profession and chat with them about the paths they took to get where they are now, including the times they stumbled, the times they fell, and the times they needed a little help. To encourage candor and vulnerability on this show, the attorney guests will remain nameless, but their stories will be laid bare for your consideration. This episode is sponsored by the Princeton Review. For more than 35 years, students and their families have trusted the Princeton Review to help them get into their dream schools. Their mission is to provide personalized, innovative, best-in-class private tutoring, test prep, and admission products and services to help students knock down barriers and achieve their academic goals. They are solely on the side of the students. They are not affiliated with any of the test developers. When it comes to your future, they'll cover you every step of the way. With score guarantee courses, private one-on-one tutoring, webinars, and support articles, you'll never lack the tools you need. Check them out at www.review.com or call 800-2-REVIEW. That's 800-273-8439. And save 20% on your course enrollment with promo code TPRLLP.
Hello listeners, my name is Brooke, and I'm an undergraduate student at Oklahoma State University. I'm majoring in biochemistry and molecular biology and planning to apply to law school this fall. I'm interning for Leg Up Legal, and I'll be today's guest host for the Law Lives Project. This week's guest had a rough start to law school due to a bad relationship, but managed to find her way. She got exposure to law by working for a jury consulting company, and she decided to continue working for that company and go to law school part-time. After law school, she started working for an insurance defense law firm, and she utilized the early years of her career to explore lots of different practice areas and practicing at different law firms. Eventually, she found her way in-house, and she primarily focuses on regulatory practice and consumer finance. Listen to the episode to hear all of the ups and downs of her career.
When did you want to become a lawyer? How did you know that this was like your calling?
I definitely wasn't someone who knew from a young age that I wanted to be a lawyer. I grew up watching the crime TV shows like LA Law and Law and Order and The Practice and all of those. And I was always really fascinated with especially true crime. And so I always kind of knew I wanted to go that route. As a matter of fact, when I was in college, I actually went through the police academy because I thought that was kind of the route I was taking. But then my senior year in college, I happened to take a part-time job for a local jury consultant. And at the time, I didn't know much about, I knew nothing about jury consulting. I didn't know that the person I worked for was so renowned in that space. It was just a field that I just was really unfamiliar with. And I took this position. It was more of an administrative role, part-time at this jury consulting firm. And obviously, the consultants that worked there were making much more money and had much more flexibility in their schedules than I did. And so being a young woman, I said to my boss one day, how do I get to be where you're at? How can I get to be a consultant? And he was the one who told me to be a consultant, you're going to have to, at the very least, go to law school. And so that's kind of what began my law school journey, was just seeing somebody in a role that I kind of thought maybe I wanted to emulate. I didn't have lawyers in the family. It wasn't like my dad or mom were attorneys and I was modeling them. It was just kind of fate where I took a job and had to ask somebody, how do I get where you are? And that's really what led me to law school.
It's amazing how so many things like these are just happenstance.
Right, isn't it?
So once you took that job and then you decided to go to law school, where did you start looking? How did you decide on, you said you didn't have any family to look up to or in the lawyer regard. So how did you kind of find your way?
That is a really good question. I don't think I found my way as much as the way kind of found me. Unfortunately, that's probably one of the things that I regret a little bit, is that I feel like I was kind of swept along a path. But the good thing was, when I was working in the jury consulting world, I got to meet several different kinds of attorneys, and I got exposure to several different types of litigation. And so I did get to, right after I graduated from law school, I stayed with the consulting firm because remember, that's kind of the direction that I thought I was going to go. I thought I was going to be one of these consultants. So I stayed at the consulting firm for a little bit. I got to second chair some criminal law cases, some family law cases, and kind of dip my feet in the water a little bit. So that way I could get just a little bit of exposure to certain areas and figure out what it was that I wanted to do and what it was that I didn't want to do. So that was kind of a benefit to being in the legal space that worked with so many different types of lawyers, because I honestly don't know what I would have done had I not had that experience. I always thought I wanted to do criminal law. That was like, I was, during law school, I would have told you I wanted to do criminal law. And then once I got out and started working a little bit in the criminal defense space, second chairing those trials, I realized how much stress it is to have you be the person that stands between somebody's life and liberty. I mean, that was kind of a lot of stress for me. And I realized early on it wasn't for me. It's just not something that I enjoyed. It caused me too much stress and anxiety. So I really kind of ruled out certain areas that I knew I didn't want to be in, and then followed the natural progression after that.
I feel like that's so important to get that exposure. Did you choose your law school based on like the program that they offered, or was it like location, or was it determined on your LSAT score? Like, what was the big determining factor?
Honestly, the answer to that is that I was in a serious and seriously bad relationship at the time I started law school. And lesson learned, if you're going to try to go to law school and have a significant other, make sure it's somebody supportive. He had roots in this area. And so I made a decision to stay because of that relationship. And also at the time, because I didn't go, directly after college, I worked for 6 to 9 months, I think, before I started law school. And so I had been paying my own bills, and we were, he and I were living on our own. And so I didn't necessarily have the luxury of just going full-time to school again. So I had to look for someplace that offered a part-time program. So I would say that was the biggest criteria for me, was I had to find something local, and I had to find something that offered night program.
Okay. Would you say that during like your law school, if you don't mind sharing, like the biggest stressor was that relationship, and how did you deal with trying to balance both of those things?
In hindsight, like, it's hard for me to say like I have regrets, because I'm super happy with where I'm at today. And I feel like all decisions and everything that I've done in life has led me to this place. So it's hard for me to say like I regret anything that happened to me. But at the same time, like looking back, that relationship was a hard one to have during law school. I mean, it was one where I was with somebody who was cheating and emotionally abusive, and all of those things that are so cliche, but you hear about so often. And I wish I had been stronger. I wish I had gotten out of it sooner, because I feel like it took so much away from my law school experience. Like, there's times when, you should be studying, or you should be doing something, outlining or whatever. And instead I'm driving around town trying to see if I can find his car, to see if I can locate where he's at or what he's doing. And it was just, a very toxic relationship. And so at the end of the day, I would say you have to kind of decide, if it comes down to it, what is your priority? Is your priority your relationship, or is it law school? And I don't think there's necessarily a right or wrong answer to that. And I'm certainly not saying you can't have both, because so many of my friends did it seamlessly. But if it's not the right relationship, if it's not a supportive relationship, if it's not somebody who's going to encourage you to be and do your best, then you need to figure out what your priority is at that time. And again, priorities can change, but if at that time your priority is your relationship, then step out of law school for a while. Give yourself that time to focus on the relationship. Or if your priority is law school, then end that relationship if that's what you need to do. But trying to balance a terrible relationship in law school is probably one of my biggest regrets to this day.
So during your first year of law school, you said that you didn't have a whole lot of like familial connections and stuff like that. How was the culture shock going into law school? Was it what you expected, or was it easier, harder? Was it more competitive?
It's hard to say. It's never really, I think you read about it and kind of what to expect because you've read it and you've heard it and you've talked to people about it. But until you're really there, you don't truly get it. And most of us that go to law school, we're used to being the top of our class. We're the overachievers. We're the ones who are top 10%. We've got good grades. We're used to acing the tests. And now you're in a room full of people like that. And so all of a sudden the stakes get a lot higher and you might not be the top 10% anymore because all of a sudden the fish that you're swimming with in this pond are a whole lot bigger. That part was very intimidating for me personally. I think one of my other biggest challenges in law school was my own fear and lack of confidence. It's easy during your first few weeks of law school, especially, to look around the room and see these people who seem really accomplished and fool yourself into believing they're smarter than you or they know some secret to getting through law school that you don't know. And you easily psych yourself out. That fear and lack of confidence was probably one of my other biggest impediments in law school, honestly.
Do you have any advice for overcoming that shock to your confidence and trying to get over thinking that everybody's better than you and that kind of stuff?
I don't know that you can ever really get over that part of it, but the things that I think you can do, I think that you can make a commitment to yourself that you're not going to compare your notes, your outlines, your study habits with anybody else's, right? Just like I hear people all the time talking about social media and they're like, I've got to take a break from social media, right? It's like a cleansing experience. And I think in law school, you have to tell yourself, like, I'm not going to compare my notes and my outlines with everybody else's because I did that. At first I was convinced that my outlines don't look like the person next to me. And so somehow I must be doing something wrong. And I spent a lot of time rewriting outlines to try to conform to what other people were doing. And ultimately that didn't serve me because I wasn't learning from somebody else's outlines. And what they thought was important wasn't necessarily what I would think was important, and how they memorized facts wasn't how I memorized facts. And so I think the best thing that you can do for yourself is just make a commitment that you know what you have to do. You got into law school because you're smart on your own. So just tell yourself, like, I might join a study group, and we can talk and we can have conversations about these cases to help me understand. But at the end of the day, I'm not going to compare my outlines and I'm not going to look at what other people have written in their notes. I'm going to rely on my own. And I think that's one of the best things that you can do. Like after you take your first test in law school, don't compare answers with other people. It'll mess up your head. You will be like, oh my gosh, I must have failed because I didn't put what this person put. At the end of the day, it's completely subjective. So just do yourself a favor and do not go down that rabbit trail.
I feel like everybody struggles with that at some point, like trying to find the self-confidence and imposter syndrome and dealing with all that stuff.
Exactly.
And then between your first and your second year, did you have an internship or an externship or?
I did. I had a couple different internships, and I would love to tell you that they were like super valuable to my career. They were in some ways, but not necessarily directly. So I mentioned that I was always this criminal law buff. So growing up with like these TV shows about criminal law, I was always so into it. So I had internships. I think my first one was with the local district attorney's office. And then my second one was with an organization called CLEAT, which is a law enforcement association that provides legal representation to its law enforcement members. And so even though I didn't ultimately go that route, I didn't end up doing criminal law. And I don't think anything that I learned specifically or substantively in those internships is something that I'm using today, but they're still super important to my career because you need to have those on a resume to let future employers know that you're capable and you're dependable in like a real world setting. I feel like the day and age when the name of your school could carry you through, I just don't think we're there anymore. Most of the hiring that I do now and that I've experienced being an applicant, it's really based on like, what is your experience? What can you tell me? What real world experience do you have? What can you tell me that you've done? And I think that is probably where the internship or externship comes in, regardless of if you don't get the internship that that you think is going to serve you specifically in your career, do it anyway, because you need something on your resume to show your future employer. Like, I show up on Monday mornings. I don't call in sick every Friday. I can put in the hard work. I can do the grunt work. Like, you need that, somebody to vouch for you for that. So it's super important that you have that.
Right. And I feel like it's equally as important to cross things off your mental list as to what area you wants to go in as well.
Absolutely.
And then between your 2L and your 3L year, were both of those internships between your 1 and your 2, or were any of them between your 3 and your...
One of them, my first one was between my 1L and 2L, and my second one was between my 2L and 3L, even though I did night classes. So I didn't have like a traditional year. I took classes during the summer too. So I kind of went almost year round, but I did find some time for externships, working, several, 10 hours a week here and there as I was also working.
Did you feel like there was any super big positives to night school or super big negatives? Like, if you had to recommend it, would you recommend regular, like the normal route, or would you recommend night school?
I don't think there's a right or wrong answer to that, because I'd hate to speak for anybody's unique circumstances. Obviously, I think in a perfect world, if everything had gone the way I wanted it to, I would have loved to have gone, full time to law school and had that traditional experience. If my daughter came to me and said she wanted to go to law school, I would highly recommend that's what she do. But in my experience, there were a lot of other factors at play. I had a mother who was sick, and I was taking care of her. I had a lot on my plate at that time, and like I said, I was in a relationship that was a pretty serious one. And I didn't feel like I had the luxury of not working and going full-time to law school. So I think ultimately, I would recommend that people go full-time, but if it's not in the cards for you, you can make it work going part-time. So I don't think one is necessarily any better than the other. I just think that you get more of the traditional experience if you're able to go full-time.
Do you feel like having night school on your resume helped or hurt future applications to different job placements?
You don't have to disclose that on your resume. You don't have to say like I went to night school or whatever. You just put I graduated from this law school in this year, and that's it. Or I graduated from this law school. I don't think that necessarily had as much impact as, let's say, my experience and things like that.
I feel like it shows your level of dedication to be able to do night school and taking care of family and all that.
Yeah, I mean, and there's some employers that don't necessarily appreciate that, because they want somebody that has, a certain law school on the resume, or they want somebody that has, a certain college on the resume, whatever the case may be. And you just have to accept that the right job is out there for you, and don't try to fit yourself into or insert yourself into somewhere where they don't want you, because you're not going to be happy there either. So the right position and the right fit will come along. I promise you, everybody that goes to law school will find their place. They will find what they're meant to do. I know plenty of people that have graduated from law school and are in a compliance role or are in a business role for whatever reason. I just feel like everybody finds where they're meant to be ultimately.
Right. So while you were in night school, did you have a chance to join any of the extracurriculars like moot court or law review or anything of the like?
I did participate in a few activities that I would highly recommend, even though, again, I don't think they're necessarily a direct value to my ultimate career. But for example, one of those was mock trial. And I think mock trial is such a great experience. In law school, your focus is really on substantive law, and they don't teach you how to file a complaint or how to negotiate a Rule 11 agreement with opposing counsel. Those things just take experience. And mock trial was literally the closest you could get to having that kind of experience. And even that didn't, cover everything that I was going to need to know. I can remember when I first got out of law school and started working with, after I was done with the jury consulting role and I started working with some firms, I had to file a document with the court. And when I was drafting this complaint to file, at the top of the complaint, there's a blank and it says case number and it's blank. And I remember going to the paralegal and saying, what number do I put in there? Do I make up a number, or how do I what number goes in there? And the paralegal thought I was crazy. And she said, no, the clerk is going to assign a number to it. But nobody tells you that in law school. That's not the kind of experience you're getting. I can tell you like what the family code says or what the UCC says, but I can't tell you, necessarily how you go to the local courthouse and if they want you to file electronically or can you file in person and how that's done and all those things that you really have to learn from experience. So mock trial was probably about the closest I got to getting at least some of that experience, other than kind of the substantive laws, like the trial experience and how the trial flows and things like that you just don't get from reading about it. Also, my 3L year, I was a legal research and writing aide. And to me, that was probably one of my most important roles because I cannot stress enough the importance of just having good communication skills, especially writing. So I encourage everybody, like, get all the training and experience you can get in that area, because it's been my experience that people who have maybe mediocre legal skills are going to excel as long as they have excellent communication skills. So I've always kind of put myself in that bucket. Like, my communication skills were always great. Even if I was only a mediocre attorney, I could get by on my communication skills.
I feel like it counts. Communication skills are viable in any position.
Yes, for sure.
So when you are ending your 3L year, how did you find offers for job placement, or how did you start going about the process to try and find a place for you after law school?
Again, before law school, I was working in that jury consulting firm in that administrative role. And that job, like I said, was the impetus for my law school career. And once I finished law school, I was doing some basic consulting work with that firm. And that meant that I would research and then assist with voir dire. In Texas, we call it voir dire. If people are listening from elsewhere, they're probably laughing because they call it voir dire. Before too long, though, I really had a hunger for more than that. I was invested in some of these cases that I was working on. And instead of just going in and picking a jury and leaving, I really wanted to stay with the case from start to finish. And so at that point, I really started thinking more about my legal career and what that would look like. And did I want to stay in this consulting role, or did I want to practice law for a while? And so thankfully, like I said, I was working with several attorneys at the time, and I ended up taking a job with one of the attorneys that we worked with at the time. That's how I got my first job. Again, it was all about who you know and who you meet and who you impress.
Right. So would you say that when you were hired on by that attorney, would that be your first legal position, or would you count your counsel as your first legal position?
I would say that being a jury consultant was definitely a legal position, but I wasn't necessarily operating in the capacity of an attorney. So my first real attorney role was working in a law firm.
So for your first job as an attorney, was it what you expected, or did you love it? Did you hate it? Like, what were your thoughts on it?
Going back a very long way, I think I really actually enjoyed it a lot, but at the same time, it was a lot of stress, because when you're in law school, you always have somebody else you can ask, whether it's your peers or your professors. And then you realize pretty quickly that once you become a lawyer, you're the one people are asking the questions of. And so all of a sudden you have that kind of pucker moment where you get a little bit nervous, like, what am I doing? Am I really equipped to be here? Should anybody really be relying on me for their legal advice? Your first legal job, I think you feel a little bit in over your head.
This episode is sponsored by the authors of #Networked, a new book written by me and 19 amazing women lawyers who I met on LinkedIn. During the early days of the COVID-19 pandemic, many of us were facing uncertainty in our lives and businesses. We went searching for support and community. We took to social media, and lo and behold, we found our soul sisters on LinkedIn. Who would have thought? I used to think LinkedIn was a glorified resume platform, but it's become so much more. Our group of lady lawyers grew to over 50 women. We laughed together, cried together, shared in losses and successes, and cheered each other on while we juggled practicing law, parenting, relationships, launching new companies, building online courses, side hustles, main hustles, podcasts, and more. 20 of us got together and self-published a book to share our stories about the early days of the pandemic, and we hope that it'll show others that you can find community even in the darkest of times. If you're searching for support or inspiration, please check out our book and read our stories. It's now available on Amazon in both Kindle and paperback editions. Just go to tinyurl.com/networkedbook. That's networked with an ED on the end. Thank you to all of my co-authors for dreaming up this beautiful project and bringing it to life through sheer force of will and determination. And now, back to the episode.
Thankfully, one of my first jobs, and again, I think this was really fear-based, I knew I didn't want to go the criminal route because there was too much stress on me to try to have that much say in whether somebody goes to jail or not. So I took a job with an insurance defense firm. That was kind of my first law firm job. The law firm did insurance defense work, meaning they did work for homeowners and auto insurance. If you ever do insurance work, it is a lot of depositions. It's a lot of filing paperwork. It's a lot of subrogation claims. And I feel like I kind of got thrust into a place that was a great learning experience for me, because having to go in and do 4 and 5 depositions in a week, you get over your fear pretty darn quick. Going into the courtroom and having to argue motions at least once a week. Again, you learn to get over some of those fears. So I feel like I got thrown into the fire, and I think I had the first moments of just feeling overwhelmed and nervous, but I ultimately feel like it was the best place for me to learn because I did get so much experience, and they really just threw me in there and let me do my work.
Do you feel that having that experience was worth not doing exactly what you intended to do, like how you were wanting to do criminal law and stuff, that kind of stuff? Was it healthy for you, do you think, to take that step back, learn, and then you were able to continue on with what you wanted to do?
I think it all worked out for the best. As interesting as criminal law is to me, and I still am like a true crime junkie, I just don't think I would be happy in that role because it is a lot of stress. And I know myself well enough now to know that stress and anxiety are not something that I handle really well. Part of the reason I went to an insurance defense firm was because I kept telling myself, nobody can really get hurt. If I screw up and I miss a deadline, or if I screw up and give the wrong advice, or I screw up and say the wrong thing, the worst that's going to happen is that the insurance is going to have to pay out a claim. And that doesn't really seem that offensive to me. And so even though I thought my passion was criminal law, I think ultimately I learned that it's still something that I love. It's not an area that I want to practice in. I know a lot of people that, the same with family law. I came from a divorced family, and I always thought I would love to be able to help people. I would love to be able to do family law and help people go through these divorces and make it just a better experience for them and their children. And I learned that's, I might like those things, but that's not an area that I want to practice in. Once I think you get some real life experience in those areas, you can kind of rule out the things that don't serve you and the things that just you're not meant for. And so I feel like where I'm at today is where I'm supposed to be, even though it wasn't where I thought I was going to be or where I thought I wanted to be at this point.
It seems like you really enjoy that position, but what prompted you to move on?
You're always growing as an attorney. And well, in life, we're all always growing, right? And so with any job you take, really. But, after a couple years at a job, I think it's easy to say, to reevaluate and say, is this a position where I'm going to be able to move up and get more experience or different experience? Or is this something where I just need to maybe move on if I want to get that other experience? And for me, I realized that where I was at, I didn't want to necessarily only do that insurance defense work forever. I feel like I'd gotten very familiar with depositions. I'd gotten very familiar with trial work. And now I was kind of ready to take on some new opportunities. And so after that, I went to work in a firm that did civil litigation. So I was still litigating, but it was a more expansive role. It wasn't just limited to insurance. It was business and things like that, breach of contract, tort cases, business clients, and all of that.
Did you enjoy the variety that came with that position?
I did. I mean, I think there's something to be said about that. My whole career, I feel like it's been kind of one of trial and error, right? Where I'm testing out different things to see what I like and I don't like. And for that, I feel like I'm very fortunate. I know plenty of people that say to themselves in law school, I know that I want to do family law or whatever. And they go to a boutique firm and they do family law, and that's all they ever do. And maybe they're sublimely happy in that role. And kudos to them. That's amazing. For me, again, not having had that experience, I had to really kind of dabble in different areas. And I had the luxury of being able to dabble in different areas to see what do I really like and what don't I really like before I commit to something. So having a lot of experience in civil litigation allowed me to try different things and see what kinds of cases I liked and what kinds of cases I didn't like, and where I knew I wanted to be and where I knew I didn't want to be. For example, some of my civil litigation was in the federal court building, and I hated going to federal court. It was terrible for me. Everybody was just so formal, and it was not, I remember being in the district courts where we'd be sitting behind, all the attorneys would be sitting in the lounge, like joking and laughing. And then we'd go oppose each other in the courtroom, and we'd go out for lunch afterwards. And it was just such a cordial, laid back kind of vibe. And you go to federal court and people are in suits, and it's just it was just something that wasn't me. It didn't feel like me. And so I knew really quickly, I don't want to do federal practice, right? That's just not something I'm comfortable in. It's not where I ultimately want to be. So I was able to rule that out. I had some cases in JP court, same thing. I was like, this is like, I couldn't do this every day. This is like a mockery kind of. And so I feel like I got to try out those different things and figure out what space I liked and what space I didn't like, and where I was comfortable and where I wasn't comfortable. And if there was particular clients and particular cases that I enjoyed better than others.
Did crossing all of these things off your mental list help you get into your current position or decide that, oh, this is my interest, this is where I want to go?
Again, I would not say it was, this is where I want to go. It was more of a big list and crossing off what I knew I didn't want until I was kind of left with what was on my plate.
Yeah.
And so I respect the fact that there are some people that are so driven and they know exactly what they want and they go after it. And if I had to do it over again, I would definitely probably take more of an active role in focusing on what I do want and following that path versus trial and error and just crossing off what I don't want. But I definitely think that where I'm at today is because I'm in-house today. I'll tell you that. And I think going through a couple of different law firms and realizing I'm great at the law. I'm great at talking to my clients, but there's a whole business side that I am terrible at when it comes to billing and collecting and having tough conversations about payment and money. That is not where I'm good. And so I learned real quick, again, what I was good at and what I wasn't, or how I wanted to spend my time. And so those are the kinds of things that I think kind of led me to my current role.
So at your current role, if it's not too revealing, what does your day-to-day life look like? And if you could say what you do as well.
Yeah, sure. So currently I work and this is kind of confusing, but my current position is as in-house counsel for a healthcare company. Although my particular role is with its revenue management subsidiary. So in plain English, what that means is essentially hospital and physician billing. My company works with hospitals and physicians' office and does all of their billing for them. I'm part of a legal team that consists of several lawyers, each with kind of a different focus area. And I'm one of the regulatory lawyers that has a focus on consumer finance, which is essentially credit and collection, like when you ask people for payment and when you can report them to the credit bureaus, things like that. That's my current position.
Okay. What would your day-to-day life look like?
It's a lot of emails.
Okay.
It's probably like 85% of my day is, I think with any kind of legal practice, you're definitely more reactive than proactive. You don't have a lot of time to just say, how do I make the world a better place? Because you're constantly reacting and answering kind of one-off questions that come your way. Being in a company or an in-house attorney, I would say that another large part of my day is meetings, and more meetings. I constantly have to sit in on meetings with business leaders to get a really full understanding of and provide guidance for certain projects and initiatives. I do legal research still, like when the business comes up with new plans for profitability, they want me to kind of review those and make sure that we're within the parameters of the law. I review pending legislation. Part of my job is to kind of stay current on what's going on in the law, and as laws are changing really quickly right now, especially in healthcare. After the pandemic, we're seeing a lot of legislation come out about collections and what you can collect from people and how you can collect from people, and how you can ask for money and what you can do if they don't pay. Those are changing. It seems like daily on a state and federal level, and so I've been kind of reviewing that pending legislation and working with the business on how we pivot to make ourselves compliant with those new laws. I manage outside counsel. If you decide to be an in-house attorney, you rarely, if ever, will go to trial. You hire local counsel to do those things for you. And part of that is I have to manage their strategy and spend and kind of act as the conduit between outside counsel and the decision makers within my organization. I review marketing materials that, whenever we want to put something out that's public facing, I'll review that, or sending letters, things like that. And then personal relationship building is a large part of it. I think sometimes you just have to have time to socialize with your clients, about how was their weekend and how are their dogs and what's going on with their kiddos. I think that's a large part of being successful in the legal business.
In your position, what would you say the best way to network is? Like, get in touch with people that are similar in your position?
So if people are wanting to go in-house, I would say that is generally not something that you do right out of law school. It doesn't mean that it can't happen, but generally the career track for most people is that they start out a law firm setting, and then they will eventually, if they want to, take a position in-house. And so the best way I think you can get an in-house position is to really network with big law firms. Like a lot of companies, like when we're hiring our outside counsel, we're hiring big law firms. And so when we have job openings for in-house counsel, the first place that I would start is by reaching out to those big law firms and saying, we're hiring. Do you have any associates that are ready to, come in-house yet? Or do you guys know of anybody who's looking for an in-house position? And those attorneys will pass those listings onto their friends. So I think that's really a great way for you to network. I think that's probably the best way you can network. Another thing that, I tell people to do this all the time because I don't think enough of it goes on. And that is, if you know for a fact, like you want to work as in-house counsel in a certain industry, I would say get on LinkedIn and just start sending people messages and say, I'm a law student. I'm super interested in what it is that you do. Would you be willing to talk to me for 15 minutes and give me some advice on how you got there, or just meeting people, I think, and talking to them. Again, remember, that's kind of how I got to the legal career field. Was I went to my boss and said, how do I get to have what you have? How do I get to your level? And that's the guidance that I got. And I think not enough people do that these days. If somebody reached out to me on LinkedIn, just a cold email, and said, hey, I saw your LinkedIn profile. It looks very interesting to me. I'm a law student. I'd love to talk to you. Can we meet for coffee? I would be more than willing to do that. I'd be more than willing to meet up with somebody to talk to them about what I think they needed to do to improve their resume. And I can't imagine I'm the only person that feels that way. So I think sometimes just reaching out and having that, not being afraid to ask questions would be the best way to market yourself.
And then circling back, how long do you usually work in a week? Like, what are your hours like? Is it bi-monthly or?
Like, it's a lot different than being in a law firm. When you are with a law firm, you have generally a target number of billable hours that you need to meet per day, week, month, year, whatever. And I don't have that looming over my head, which is why a lot of people like being in-house, because I don't have to hit a certain number of hours. That part of it is great in the sense that it's possible that some weeks I might only work 30 hours, depending on what I have on my plate. The flip side of that, though, is that I have to work until I get the job done. So there's some weeks that I'm working, 70-hour weeks or something, crazy. But generally speaking, I probably get to the office around 8 and I leave by 5 on an average day. Like with any other job, there's times when I have to take calls at 7 p.m. or work over the weekends. Most recently, I was trying to relay the contents of an email to a coworker while I was at the Weasley candy store at the Wizarding World of Harry Potter with my daughter. So, there's times when you go on vacation and you can't even get away. But for the most part, I would say that it more closely emulates like a 9 to 5 type job. And I appreciate that for the most part, I can control my own schedule. So if my daughter has a meet the teacher event, I can mark myself out for the afternoon. So I have the ability to like take calls from my daughter's soccer practice or respond to emails while I'm cooking dinner. And when you're doing litigation, you're not, you're at the mercy of the court or opposing counsel. So no matter how much work I have on my plate, I generally get to do it on my timetable. And so that makes it a little bit more favorable in my mind.
Do you feel that that makes it easier to kind of balance that work and social family life balance?
Absolutely. I see the people in the big firms, and I think everybody should probably start there, right? Like get that experience while you're young and single and have no kids. Some of my best friends managed to have their partners in law firms and they have families. I think the difference is they have a lot of help. They either have a spouse that doesn't work or they have full-time nannies or something. Like it's definitely a commitment. Whereas I am, I'm certainly probably not getting paid as much as they are, but I can on a Friday afternoon go pick up my daughter and go to her science fair, or I can go in late because I've got to, meet with her teacher about something, and again, that's not all the time. Obviously I have to make concessions and there's times when I can't get out of meetings and there's things that I have to have on my calendar, but for the most part, I'm not on a litigation schedule. And so I feel like I have a little bit more flexibility in that regard.
That seems wonderful. I feel like that makes everything easier.
Yes, it definitely helps me. I don't know how other people do it. My hat's off to them because I don't think I could.
Do you feel as though there's any cons to your current position?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's probably normal to feel like, there's things that you don't like about your job. I would say that one of the main things that is and I don't mean this to sound bad, but when you're in a law firm environment, you're kind of with your peers and you can laugh and talk and cut up about your clients. You can, if somebody's calling that you just aren't in the mood to talk to at that point, you can avoid their call for a day, wait till you're in your right headspace to talk to them, whatever. And I work with my client. So I can't hide from them. Like they barge into my office or they, can see when I'm online and they can just come and pick up the phone or whatever. So I don't have the luxury of being able to hide. I'm with them all the time. Another thing that I think for me, and it's not necessarily a bad thing, it's just for me has been a challenge. And that is that when you are in-house, you have to represent a business client rather than a person. So you have to know more than just like substantive law. You actually have to understand business finance and how to evaluate risk while keeping profitability in mind. And so learning corporate speak in finance terms is definitely a challenge for my math adverse brain. Corporate speak is something that I don't love. I'll never get used to the, people referring to the sweet spot or like circling back and talking about win-win scenarios. Like I don't love hearing about those things. I feel like if I was in a law firm, we'd be cutting up about it, but you kind of have to put up with it in a corporate environment. And before long, you find yourself even like using that lingo. Unfortunately.
Okay. And then to wrap things up, would you have any advice for students that are pursuing either your path or any path in general?
Let's see. Number one of the things that I'd wish I'd done was take a more active role and been like a little bit more focused on what it was that I did want instead of just crossing off the things that I didn't like. Again, I think you can probably ultimately land in the right place, but I think it's just a longer way of getting there. So I kind of wish I was more focused on here's what I know I did want instead of what I didn't want. I think most people now have lost sight of what it really means to network. And networking is not going to meetings and doing the obligatory business card distribution. I feel like networking today can happen. It doesn't only have to happen at bar associations. It can happen literally anywhere. You can you can make friends with somebody who works in real estate and find out that they know somebody in a legal position. So I would say when you're networking, make personal connections with people and don't just take business cards, but like follow up with people. And one of the things that has always worked for me, or especially when I was starting out, was, I would get business cards and I would try to write down like a couple interesting facts about that person on their business card. And so every week or so, I would go through my list and I'd rotate and I'd send out a message and say, oh, here's, John Doe. He really likes hard rock cover bands. And so I could send him a note and say, hey, did you see what concert's coming to town this weekend? Are you going? Or, here's so-and-so. She's got a daughter about my daughter's age. And I could email her and say, hey, is your daughter doing this or that? Because listen to what I had happen this week. And I think that just making those personal connections, that is what's going to really land you the connections you need to find a job, because it really comes down to who you know that's going to get at least your foot in the door somewhere. So I think making those connections, I would say I've had some situations where I've had horrible bosses, but I've never burned any bridges nonetheless. Don't ever leave your employer on a bad note if you can help it, because again, those people are going to help you find your next jobs. And I get to work early, show up early. I think it just shows that you have passion and commitment for your job, and it gives you good reputation among your peers and your employers, who again are going to be the references you need for future employers. So I think all of those things are kind of going to help you really market yourself and pay attention to your personal brand. I know people talk about that all the time, but recognize that each job is just a job, but your career and your reputation is going to last so much longer than that. So try to make the best decisions you can. Be a good person before you can be a good lawyer or good anything. You have to start with the base of being a good person. So I just think all those things that people probably have heard a million times before, kind of cliche, are really what it comes down to. I mean, you keep hearing them because they work and they're true.
Yeah, well, I appreciate you so much. Thank you for your time.
Of course. And if you need anything else, don't hesitate to reach out, and best of luck in school.
Of course. Thank you so much.
All right, everyone. That's it for today. Thank you to our guest speaker, and thank you to all of you for listening to another episode of the Law Lives Project. If you're a prospective law student that's interested in speaking with attorneys one-on-one, check out leguplegal.com. Legup Legal is an online mentoring platform that connects prospective law students with attorney mentors. Sign up for a membership today to learn more about the practice of law and see if it's a good fit for you. If you enjoyed this episode, I would appreciate it if you left a review on iTunes or any other platform that you're listening on. If you have any questions or comments about anything you heard on the podcast, or if you have ideas for guest speakers, please contact me by emailing me and my team at info@leguplegal.com. Thanks again, and don't forget to tune in next week.